There are some schools that have already determined that they are going to delay on in-person education for a week or two post-holiday. And that is to essentially allow for whatever happens over the holiday to run its course, and we can then look at health data and determine when is it safe to return to school. There are others who are very much planning to stay their course, and when I say that, I mean if they're virtual, they're going to remain virtual. If they're in person, they're going to go back to in person. After the holidays. There is a concerted effort being made by every school, asking folks, much like we've said on this call and we've heard elsewhere, that to really use restraint during the holidays and be safe. If possible, avoid gatherings. If you're going to be in gatherings, do so in a safe environment, wear masks, practice social distancing, etc. And some of this is we have plans, but we also recognize that if data, particularly health data or feedback, really tell us that we need to change those plans, that we have to be flexible. And I think that's the key. It's hard. It makes it really difficult to plan, but we also realize that we can only plan for so much time in advance, and we still have to be ready to be nimble when needed. The break is also going to be a time, I think, for people to get that literal break from this. This has been hard. We've been doing this since March, excuse me. And while the summer was a break, it was also the anxiety of what was going to happen this fall was also on our mind. So it wouldn't really feel like a true break. So this is a time that families and students and teachers and everyone really should use this time to disconnect and regroup and start the new year with as much energy and positivity as possible, because this, we're hoping that the vaccine and we're hoping that these other measures are going to make 2021 more manageable, and certainly it'll be more manageable than 2020, because 2022 just took us by surprise. That said, it's still important that we all kind of enter into it knowing that the only constant is going to be change, and it is likely that we're going to be in this state that we're in right now for at least a month or two, just based on patterns that we've seen in the past. And so this is really probably the first time everyone can kind of just take a breath, turn off the computers, turn off the screens. Don't worry about multiplication. Read a bit every day if you can, but as a math teacher, it pains me to say don't worry about math, but let's not worry about math unless it comes up in real life. And really kind of think about it. But as far as schools go, that's the game plan. They're having their December board meetings, they're making their decisions for January, but they also recognize that if data tells us that what our plans are not possible, that we have to be ready to make changes.
Are the authorizers recommending any changes to curriculum? Anything that you can share about curriculum, grades, parent communication?
Sure. So the authorizers don't really make any recommendations. Our role is really to ensure that schools are following the rules that are set forth. What I'm hearing though from schools and just kind of in the sort of education circle as a whole is we're really trying to take a look at what makes sense, given the parameters that we have, given the engagement that we have. How do we present instruction and curriculum in a manner that makes sense to kids that might be different in the virtual sense than than it is in an in-person. And we also have to take into account the sort of stress that kids are under, regardless of where they're educated. Even if they're in the same classroom they were in February of last year, the circumstances are so different that the mental health of children and of teachers is something that schools and organizations are taking very seriously. So even though it's not in our role to be engaged in that kind of work, we are supporting our schools and finding the right kind of resources to support folks in that sort of in the more social emotional realm, so that the academics can actually have a place to land. I mean, you could have the best lesson, you could have the best resources, but if a student isn't mentally or emotionally ready to receive it, it doesn't have really any value. So we recognize that we have to sort of really take a look at, the Maslow's needs, if you will, before we can get to Bloom's taxonomy of learning. So that would be where I'd say we're really talking to schools about paying attention to that and encouraging them to continue to listen to their teachers, which they have been, because the teachers have a really good insight into that in terms of students and for themselves.
Do you have any updates on how many students you still have to connect with, and what kind of support you may need from community to help our students?
Sure. And again, I can only answer for a limited number of schools because that's what I have guidance, what I have access to. the trends amongst the schools that I work with and that we work with are very similar. So I'm going to extrapolate them to the entire community, but I also recognize that there might be an example here or there that is different. So what we're seeing is that the majority of students and families have been reached. We don't really have a lot of kids that are just not, we don't know where they are, or we were expecting them, I should say, and we don't know where they are. You know, and tactics, everything from, you know, phone calls to home visits have happened. And even in the world of COVID, you know, you still have principals or school administrators getting in the car and mask on, you know, 6 feet from the door, knocking on there just to check on how folks are doing. You know, we're hearing that that connectivity and access is an issue. Granted, I think it's gotten better based on, you know, community sort of resources that have become available, and just has been a focus for all of us to help that to that end. So that's been an issue. And I think there's also this feeling of being overwhelmed. Sometimes kids don't log in or engage because they may not have supervision, or they may have, you know, the parent might just not be ready to do it that day. And as a mom of a 5-year-old who's doing virtual school, I know that feeling. I mean, that dread of like, oh gosh, here we go. She doesn't have her homework done, or she's not ready, and maybe we just won't log in. And so that's a very real feeling, and we recognize that. So I believe that schools and teachers are trying to do whatever they can to reassure families that it's okay, log in even if you don't have things done. Like, we would rather see you and engage with you and than to not see you or have you at all. You know, so I think that as far as student engagement, the numbers are very promising, but I also think that that's something that we recognize that it doesn't, just because we reach it this week, if we don't have that same effort, we may not reach it next week. So it's a concerted effort. I think the area where we can all see some improvement, or where we all like to see some improvement, is in the parent engagement in terms of the feedback. So many of the schools are hosting town halls, or doing surveys, or hosting conferences. They're trying to do what makes sense for their communities, and they are getting parents to engage, but the percentages are still lower than we'd like to see. And the purpose of getting parent engagement is not just to have high numbers, but it's really how we get the feedback. And so if 30% of parents log in from a particular school, and that those are only families that give feedback, that's kind of all the school has to go by. And so sometimes it's great and it reflects the community, but sometimes it may not. And so we recognize that as well. And we're trying to figure out better ways to get to make, you know, parent feedback and parent engagement more accessible as well. But as far as students go, I think that it's a concerted effort. Obviously, we would like to see, until it's 100%, just like on any given school day, we want to see 100% of our students in the seats. Until it's 100%, we're not fully satisfied. But I do believe that schools have gone and found different ways to engage different partners, even community partners and others, to find ways to reach the students who they were not able to reach.
Thank you, Rajeshri. Is there anything else you would like to share with families to maybe weather this holiday period, or anything else?
Hang in there. We're all experiencing it. We all feel it. You're not alone, even when it feels like you are. And you know, whether I have one child in school and a newborn, but one child, and it's super overwhelming when I hear Cindy talk about having 3 kids, 3 different stages. You know, I get tired just hearing about it. It's hard. This is hard. This is hard for all of us. But the way we get through this is getting through it together. You know, the way we get on the other side of this is doing what we can to manage and mitigate through this and get to a point where things can be safe and in person, and we can use this as a learning experience to say, you know, here's what worked better perhaps in this area, and here's what we're going to do differently when we get back in schools. But it's hard for everybody, but this is a great opportunity, this 2-week break, to really just regroup and restore ourselves, whether we're parents or students, and make sure that your kids are getting that opportunity as well.
You can find more at onedetroitpbs.org, or subscribe to our social media channels and sign up for our One Detroit newsletter.